One of Donald Trump's first acts as president was to resuscitate TikTok after its service went dark this past weekend.
Long way. Oh, look at that. It says TikTok. My. What is that all about?
Well, Trump signed an executive order last night pausing the U.S. law that banned TikTok in the U.S. on the grounds of national security. Concerns surrounding the app extend to Canada as well, where a recent federal order instructed TikTok Canada to wind down its operations. Matt Malone is an assistant professor of law at the University of Ottawa, specializing in internet policy, and he joins me now in the studio. Matt Malone, it's good to see you. Thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me.
So this pause in the U.S., what does this allow TikTok to do? What does this mean for the future of this app?
Well, essentially, it's going to buy time for the app, and that's really what's been going on since this scramble on Friday, when the Supreme Court issued a unanimous decision upholding the law, originally signed with overwhelming bipartisan support in April, that required a divestment or a ban. And the things we've seen since the Supreme Court handed down that judgment has just been, shenanigans, one after another. We saw a post that Trump put out that he had spoken with Xi Jinping about making a deal. And that was followed by Trump saying that he didn't want TikTok to go dark, even as TikTok was starting to shut down, and then imploring tech companies to turn it back on, saying he would protect them. And so now he's come out with this order. And I should say there have been some interesting sort of cracks in the facade, too, with the senator from Arkansas, Scott, who's the chair of the Intelligence Committee in the Senate, saying clearly that he's supportive of the ban, and he would have access to classified intelligence. So that's very interesting.
So what is interesting, look, all of these apps, people download it, they have it on their phone. I'm 51, turning 52. I'm not a TikToker. All of them invade your privacy to some degree, and most people just skim through the terms and press accept. But TikTok is one of the most invasive of all of the apps. Is that a fair assessment? Is this what or is it just because the corporate ownership is tied to the Chinese government, or is it a combination?
Well, I think the real anxieties with the app pertain to its ownership and the links with China. I think it's really clear that, we've had a lot of concerns about commercial exploitation of our data for a long time. Companies like Google and Facebook, that's not new. What's new is the focus on national security when we address these issues. And so we're entering a bit of a new context where we're seeing the internet start to shift. We're seeing bans on hardware. We're seeing bans on software. Right. We're seeing walls come up in the internet. And I think that's very much motivated by these national security and foreign policy concerns.
So the president said today, just in the last hour, that he'd be open to Elon Musk buying TikTok. He says he's got a deal to offer for whoever wants to buy it, to give half of it to the U.S. government, and then they will approve the transaction and allow it to operate. What would you make of a world in which that happens? Is that a viable path?
Well, it's certainly interesting. It's going to raise a lot of fascinating questions about state moderation of content on social media if the U.S. is an owner in TikTok.
A collection of data.
Yeah, and right now, we're talking about regulating only the infrastructure that makes TikTok accessible, right? The app stores or the cloud servers that make it accessible. But I think really what this accounts to is the executive order says we're not enforcing the law, and we're writing letters to the providers, the affected providers, to say there's no violation of the law. So in practice, what this is doing is it's generating more uncertainty for everyone in this space. And it's a game of brinkmanship. Are Apple and Google going to allow for new downloads of the app? So far, at least last reporting I saw a couple hours ago, said no, they don't want to carry that risk. But the cloud providers are doing that. Right. And so who knows if shareholders will start to get concerned about their companies inhering risk. I mean, at the end of the day, these are serious fines that you incur for violating the law. It's $5,000 per user with 170 million users.
That's massive. In
the US. I mean, it's more money than Elon Musk has. So.
Right. And a lot of people make their living on this, the content creation world. It relies heavily on TikTok, where a lot of people have moved, more recently. So I wonder, we don't know where it's going to play out in the U.S. We don't know what's going to happen with the ownership, but there's certainly, this is a window to sort of force a distressed sale, it seems, or some sort of an arrangement. What about Canada? What can we expect here? I mean, we're distracted right now. The government is on a lot of things. Do you think we can expect a similar approach in terms of banning access to it here?
It's hard to say where this will ultimately go, although we have been in the past reactive to American policy on TikTok. We banned TikTok on federal government-issued devices shortly after Joe Biden issued a similar ban. And we've also initiated this strange ban on TikTok's corporate entity in Canada, where we've ordered a wind-up on the basis of a national security review under the Investment Canada Act. The order was secret, so it's not published. We don't know what the concerns are. But Minister Champagne, who issued the press release, said there were national security concerns. So it's a little interesting. I mean, Minister Champagne is also someone who only a couple months ago, was posting videos on CapCut on Twitter or X, and that's an app that's owned by ByteDance. It's technically covered by the American law. So it seems like in Canada we often speak out of both sides of our mouth on this issue, and our policy on TikTok is a little incoherent.
Do you see a world, though, again, it's impossible really to predict what will happen in a Trump administration with assets worth billions. Is there a world where it could be banned on the app stores in the United States, but still available in the app stores in Canada? That seems quite fraught, as a way of doing things. How do you think Canada will respond if the U.S. does go full ban on the app stores?
Well, I wouldn't see why not. I mean, Canadian users of TikTok already send their data on TikTok to the United States, right? If you're a Canadian user, your data is collected, it's sent to Malaysia, Singapore, United States, Ireland. It's not stored in Canada, which privacy law in Canada totally permits, and which we think is a bit of a problem. But in terms of whether a ban is ultimately coming in Canada, it's not clear what would be the legal mechanism to affect that. Certainly in the US, it was this specific law that named ByteDance that brought about the ban.
Well, just a last question. I'm not sure if you have a clear sense of this, but sort of the economic hit. Now, how much money, all these users, and how much money some of them make off of it. I mean, we're talking quite a shock to some people's livelihoods if this all goes away, right?
It's definitely going to affect content creators. I mean, certainly the wind-up order in Canada will affect those folks. But it's also, I'm talking about the Canadian order, it's also going to impact the ability of law enforcement to issue warrants for the app with its existing relationships with RCMP, law enforcement, national security. We know they have existing relationships and they cooperate. As well, I mean, if there's a fine that ultimately gets issued on TikTok in Canada and there's no corporate entity in Canada, how are we going to do that? So the Canadian policy is a bit strange.
Right, if you force it out and force it overseas, you have nobody to talk to when something goes bad and nobody to go get when you need to talk to them.
Yeah, pretty much.
Okay, all right, interesting. Matt Malone, Assistant Professor of Law at the University of Ottawa, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you very much.